First of all, I would like to warmly thank you, Stan, for inviting me to speak to this wonderful conference and for bringing all of us together. I'm also deeply grateful for you taking a chance on me when I decided to switch after my PhD from general relativity to cognitive neuroscience. I'm delighted to share with you today my work on how humans compress information in memory. But first, let's make a little thought experiment. Imagine you're going to Stan's birthday and you're running late, but you're running out of gas. You have to stop at the service station and to refill your car. When you enter the service station to pay for the fuel, you suddenly see this strange object. What is this? First, you're a bit surprised, and then you understand. You understand that this little tree is an air refresher for cars, and it smells like cherry. So to do so, you built this description in your brain from the function of a shape. You know that it means air refresher that is composed with a scent, here the content, so the cherry. And now that you have this new rule in your mind, you can understand very fast many other little trees and even factorize their meaning to compress them in memory. You can even think of some new little tree that may be a local specialty of France. It smells nice. You can think of a manner also to recursively nest little trees. What if a little tree smelled like a little tree that smells like cherries, and then you generate this new object never seen before? So your brain has rapidly learned a new rule, and thanks to compositionality, it was able to compress new information, generalize to new content, and apply this function in a recursive manner. So we hypothesize that to do so, your brain utilizes a language of thought. A language of thought is a system of rules that recursively compose primitive operations to form a mental description of incoming information. So in the lab, unfortunately, we cannot use little trees, but instead we use structured sequences, and we ask participants to memorize them. So in what I'm going to show you, you will see that the human brain, and your brain also, will spontaneously use this language to encode these sequences using primitive operations, and it will compress them in memory. So I'm going to show you two sequences, and you are going to tell me which one, according to you, is the simplest one. So this is the first one. So this is the second one. Who thinks it's the first one? Okay, who thinks it's the second one? Okay. Thank you, Christophe. So actually, indeed, the first one is the simplest. And why? Because actually we think that you used the geometrical primitives of rotations and symmetry to represent this sequence in memory, so that you saw that the first segment is built out of this symmetry with respect to this blue axis, and then all the other segments are a translation of the first one by shifting the starting point by -1. So this is the description provided by the language. You see that there's this H, which means this symmetry with respect to this axis, the blue axis, and to the power 4, which means it's repeated 4 times. So for the other sequence, you see that its description is very long because it's highly irregular. So for each sequence, the language of thought generates several descriptions. But we hypothesize that the brain memorizes the shortest one, the one that is most compact, that is most compressed. So the length of the shortest description is what we are going to call the language of thought complexity, LOT complexity. So I base my work on previous work that considers many different types of sequences, as you can see, always 8-point sequences on the vertices of an octagon, but you see that they have varying levels of regularity and also varying levels of complexity. Beautiful work from Maria Malric showed behaviorally that when participants have to guess the next locations in such a sequence, their performance is a linear function of this LOT complexity. Then in a follow-up work from Marie and Liping Wang, they characterize the brain network activation with fMRI to this language of thought. We wanted to find evidence for the composition of the primitive rules that form the sequences. And to do this, to look at the unfolding of mental representations, we needed a time-resolved brain imaging technique. So we went for MEG. And so the first thing we did in the MEG experiment was at least one of the first things was to try to decode if indeed the brain is representing the primitive operations. So what we did is to consider the time interval between two dots of a sequence. We labeled it as rotation, if it was a rotation, or symmetry in the context of a symmetry in a sequence. And we gave this data to a machine learning algorithm that was able to extract from the brain activity patterns if the brain activation corresponded to a rotation or a symmetry. So this is cross-validated. And actually, such an algorithm, you can train it at different times of the transition between one point and the other. So if you do so, you get what we call a generalization across time matrix. And as you can see here, there's a large red zone in this plot. That means that we were able to decode the primitive that the participants are using to code for this transition. And this means that so it's the postulated primitive from the language of thought. So this is evidence for the fact that we use this language of thought. We found the same results even when carefully controlling for visual potential biases. Furthermore, another piece of evidence comes from the fact that we could decode the fact that these geometrical sequences are made of subsequences. So, as you can see in these two sequences, they are made of 4 groups of 2 items because they go zigzag, zigzag, and so on. So we trained a decoder to decode the ordinal position in a sequence, in a subsequence. And as you can see, the output of this ordinal decoder oscillates every 2 items, which is congruent with the fact that we group into 2 items. And if we analyze the total timeline of this decoder and do a Fourier transform to have the power spectrum, we end up seeing a peak at the frequency of presentation divided by 2, which means that the brain is actually grouping the items in groups of 2. This was confirmed by also for sequences of 4 items. As you can see here now in the bottom graph, there's oscillations every 4 items, and there are 4 ordinal codes. And from the power spectrum, you also see this peak at f divided by 4 this time, because we group in 4 items. Okay, so since we had these beautiful results for geometrical sequences, we wanted to know how robust and generalizable they were. So what we did was to challenge this model and to know if the very same language could account for binary sound sequences. So I'm going to have you hear some sequences and try to memorize them, please. So this one is quite hard. So this is still complex, it's rich, but you could memorize it. So this one actually comes from another experiment on regularities. So let's go back to the real experiment. So a last sequence. Okay, so this last sequence is very easy. So actually we considered a variety of such sequences. As you can see, they have different levels of complexity and also different types of descriptions. And if you look at their descriptions now, they only involve two primitive operations, the stay operation. If you're in A, you stay in A, for example, or the change. You were in A, you change to B, or you were in B, you change to A. And we considered an oddball paradigm. So we had participants listen to these sequences for several repetitions, and then once in a while there was a deviant, and participants had to click when they were hearing a deviant sound. So as you can see here, their behavior in the task detection really correlates very well with the language of thought complexity. When we looked at brain activations to the complexity, we found that this brain network showed increase of activation as a function of complexity for habituation, and then the same network showed a decrease of activation as a function of complexity for deviant sounds. So we get stronger novelty responses for simpler sequences. We confirmed these results also with a MEG experiment using decoding, this time decoding if a sound was standard or deviant. And as you can see, we can well decode if a sound is standard or deviant for simple sequences. And actually, the decoding performance correlates with complexity. So the simpler the sequence, the larger the decoding performance. But what if we have more than two states? Then primitive change is ambiguous, because you were in A, you should go to B or to C if you have three states, you don't know. So we then moved to some other types of sequences, but again, please try to memorize them. Okay, so it was quite simple. Even if it's 12 items long, you could memorize it very easily. And what we assume is that when you saw this sequence, actually you're using an ordinal slot based code, ordinal slots in memory. So it means that whatever the spatial positions you use, whatever the spatial positions are going to be presented, it doesn't matter for the structure in memory. So all these sequences correspond to the same structure, so this repetition nested, AABBCC, AABBCC. We generalized the primitive operations of the geometrical sequences and got this jump primitive operation that allows to jump in this ordinal memory space. So you can go from A to B and A to C and so on, or even go back. So we considered several sequences. This is the work of Elias Taban, who is my PhD student. And he collected online some data on a task of sequence reproduction. So participants saw these sequences, and had to reproduce them. And actually, he shows that there's a high correlation, a linear trend between participants' performance and language of thought complexity. He shows also that the language of thought is the best predictor even for behavior, even when we compare it to other measures of complexity, like Shannon entropy or chunk complexity. But what is super nice with this technique is that we can have access to the interclick intervals between the items. And as you can see, when participants produce this sequence AABBCC, AABBCC, their interclick intervals track the hierarchical structure of this sequence. And this matches also the description provided by the language. And this observation is highly significant, even if we put together like all the sequences. Okay, so now very few words on the current analysis we're performing on an MEG experiment. Elias collected 30 participants. It's a similar task. Participants have to reproduce the sequence that they saw. These are the same sequences. And what is different is that now we present the same sequence structure 15 times in a row. So this is made in order to augment, to help learning the sequence structure and discover it. So the very first results, we could decode the ordinal slot code, so A, B, and C, even in a very careful cross-validated manner and controlling for all the confounds. And the GFP shows some correlation with complexity during the maintenance phase, but actually also during presentation. So actually we designed this study to look for, to know how sequence replay is involved in structure discovery, because there's this idea that generative replay for hypothesis testing could be involved in such a discovery of structure. And we want to know if the content of sequence replay evolves during learning from item-specific to more abstract representations. So, to conclude, we found evidence for the mental compression of sequences using a language of thought for sequences with geometrical regularities, binary sound sequences with repetitions, visual sequences with temporal regularities. LOT is everywhere. So it's also in the manner we perceive geometrical shapes, and probably Matthias Sablemeyer is going to speak about it this afternoon. It's also present in the manner we perceive numbers and arithmetic information. So if you want to know more about this, please read the following review articles. So I would like to thank all my colleagues and thank the organizers of this event, and thank you for listening.